Have you ever wondered what might happen when sheer desperation meets an unlikely rescuer in the heart of a brutal frontier storm? In this story, our heroine faces exactly that. Left with nothing but a dwindling hope of survival, she collapses in the snow, only to be saved by a stranger from a world she's been taught to fear. It's a rescue that sparks a profound bond and challenges every notion of what belonging and community truly mean. Before we dive into the full adventure, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of the amazing stories we share. By subscribing, you'll be the first to discover new tales of courage, love, and the human spirit. Now stay tuned to uncover how this life and death moment transforms two souls and an entire settlement forever. The year was 1881, when the Montana Territory stretched out in wild, untamed grandeur for those willing to stake a claim and carve a life from the vast plains. Winter here was a study in contrasts, a place of breathtaking, snow-blanketed beauty that could also transform into a punishing expanse of ice and wind. Surviving each season demanded not just fortitude, but cooperation in a land where isolation was often as deadly as any storm. It was in these perilous conditions that Eliza Benton, a grieving widow of 34, reached the precarious edge of life and death, and it was here that River Eagle, a Cheyenne hunter and guide, crossed her path when all hope seemed lost. Eliza had arrived in the settlement of Willow Bend nearly 2 years earlier with her husband Walter, a carpenter whose dream was to build something meaningful on the frontier. Initially, Willow Bend offered them promise. The settlers there needed a teacher for their children, and Eliza's education at a women's college back east qualified her for the job. Walter's skills were likewise in high demand as new cabins and structures sprang up. For a brief and shining moment, it seemed they had found a place where they could both contribute their talents and foster a sense of community. But in the autumn of that second year, influenza rolled through Willow Bend like a grim tide. Walter, once strong and lively, fell ill and died within a fortnight. His loss shattered Eliza's world. Suddenly, she found herself navigating a settlement where her status as a grieving widow made others uneasy. Preconceptions and gossip replaced the friendliness she had once known. The school board, consisting solely of men, began to question whether a widow could teach properly. A few parents withdrew their children, insisting they needed help on nearby farms or that Eliza's emotional state would hinder lessons. Although some families recognized her value, whispers persisted that a woman alone was more a burden than a resource. By the time the first snows arrived, Eliza's position had eroded. The mayor, Osborne, suggested the town's resources were too strained to support a widow who lacked financial stability. With no husband to supplement her meager teacher's income, she could not afford mounting debts at Oliver Barlow's general store. She soon realized how precarious her situation had become. Though she still had a few cups of flour and some dried beans, her woodpile dwindled alarmingly. Neighbors and one-time friends seemed to have exhausted their so-called charity, urging her to leave before the full ferocity of winter struck. One morning, Mayor Osborne knocked on her modest cabin door. He announced brusquely that a local family was heading west to Fort Pine in the morning and that Eliza should pack what she could to accompany them. It was a generous offer, he claimed, but his tone implied there was no real choice. Rather than surrender to a future in which she would lose her purpose as an educator, either by becoming a seamstress or a housekeeper, Eliza, feeling a surge of bitterness and self-determination, refused. The family's wagon left at sunrise the following day without so much as slowing by her cabin. With the blizzard intensifying and no rescue from Willow Bend forthcoming, Eliza found herself utterly alone. 3 days later, the full force of winter hammered Willow Bend, as though the land itself had declared a silent war on anything that dared linger. Eliza's supplies reached critical lows. She rationed her remaining food with meticulous care: a bit of flour, a handful of beans, and water chipped from ice in her bucket. The last stack of her firewood was gone in 2 days, leaving her cabin nearly as cold inside as out. The frigid drafts made her breath visible in the morning light. She layered every garment she owned, shawls, dresses, even old quilts, yet still could not escape the deep, numbing chill. On the fourth morning of unrelenting snow, Eliza woke to find her water bucket frozen solid and the fire dead. Her body trembled violently from cold, and she realized she would not last another week, perhaps not even another day, if nothing changed. Pride had led her to reject a life of menial labor in someone else's household. Yet now, self-preservation warred with her determination to remain in control of her fate. In the brief gray light of dawn, she made a last desperate plan. She would set out on foot for Haven's Rest, a smaller settlement rumored to be about 15 miles northwest. It was a gamble. The distance alone would be dangerous in clear weather, let alone during a harsh winter storm. But staying meant almost certain death. Eliza rummaged through what remained of her possessions. She tucked Walter's old compass into her pocket, along with the hunting knife he had once bartered for. A few matches wrapped in oilcloth, and the last scraps of her food joined her single extra blanket in a small bundle. She bundled herself in layers, pinned her hair close to keep it from whipping in the wind, and stepped out into the storm. A relentless wind battered her face as she trudged forward, snow crunching underfoot. The fury of the blizzard offered a stark reminder that nature would not yield easily to human will. For the first few hours, Eliza's sheer desperation fueled her progress. She kept her eyes on Walter's compass, forcing herself west-northwest across a landscape that often disappeared behind swirling curtains of white. Periodically, she sank to her knees in hidden drifts, stinging crystals biting any exposed skin. Though the cold was fierce, her resolve held. Each step forward was one step farther from the hopelessness she'd known in Willow Bend. Around midday, the storm surged anew, thickening the air with fresh sheets of snowfall. Visibility dropped to mere feet, leaving her disoriented. Even the compass became hard to read in the swirling maelstrom. An odd warmth began to spread in her limbs, the telltale sign of advancing hypothermia. Eliza recognized the danger. She had once read how such warmth signified the body's last defense slipping away. That drowsiness would come next. And after that, oblivion. She forced herself onward, but every muscle screamed for rest. As dusk loomed, she tumbled upon a small copse of pine trees, offering meager protection from the storm. With what little strength remained, she crawled beneath low branches, curled under her blanket, and tried to stay awake. Eliza felt certain she had reached the final moments of her life. Her thoughts drifted in and out, merging memories of Walter's warm smile with the white noise of the howling wind. Just when sleep clawed at her most insistent, she sensed more than heard the approach of footsteps through the deep snow. At first, she wondered if it was some dream or hallucination. Then a silhouette parted the low branches of her meager shelter. Alarm jolted Eliza awake. She groped for the hunting knife with frozen fingers that barely responded. Instead of an attacker, she beheld a tall Cheyenne man. Wind-scorched lines marked his face, but his dark eyes held no immediate menace. He wore furs and leather, in a style she recognized only vaguely from articles she'd once seen about Plains tribes. In a voice steady and low, he spoke in English, though his accent was different than any she'd heard in Willow Bend. "You are alone?" he asked, scanning her with an assessing gaze. Eliza nodded, her teeth chattering too hard to form words. "You cannot stay here," he added. "The cold will take you." Unable to stand on her own, Eliza accepted his outstretched arm. With astounding gentleness, he lifted her upright. Her knees buckled, and she might have collapsed had he not supported her. "My shelter is not far," he said. "If you walk, you live." The absolute clarity of his statement left no room for doubt. Gripping his sturdy frame, Eliza managed a few halting steps, her frozen feet and legs protesting each movement. They paused only when necessary to navigate around drifts that threatened to swallow them. Though his face remained largely impassive, the man offered carefully chosen words of encouragement. "Almost there," or "stay awake." At some point, the storm's shriek receded into a dull roar at the periphery of her senses. A cautious optimism flickered within her. Perhaps she would survive this ordeal after all. When she stumbled a third time, her rescuer made no comment beyond gently hoisting her into his arms. Though she tried to protest, feeling a flash of embarrassment at her helplessness, her voice refused to cooperate. The warmth of another human body, pressing close through layers of fur and leather, was both jarring and comforting. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a small shelter, reinforced against the raging elements. It resembled neither a standard log cabin nor a simple tent, but something that combined characteristics of both. Poles and hides formed the main structure, with a small, carefully protected opening at the top that allowed smoke to escape. The man guided her inside, where a central fire smoldered. Eliza caught a final glimpse of flickering flames before darkness closed in around her. In the days that followed, Eliza's fevered dreams blurred reality. She remembered sips of a hot, bitter broth that seared her parched throat, flashes of the stranger's resolute face, and the comforting crackle of the fire. When she at last emerged from that delirious fog, she realized she had been stripped of her soaked clothing, now dried and neatly folded nearby. A thick buffalo hide blanket covered her body. The Cheyenne man, she would later learn his name was River Eagle, sat cross-legged on the opposite side of the small dwelling, quietly tending to the fire. When Eliza first tried to speak, only a rasp emerged. River Eagle noticed, scooping a wooden cup of steaming broth from a pot near the fire and holding it out for her. "Drink," he said simply. The liquid warmed her from the inside, carrying a flavor unfamiliar to her palate, earthy, herbal, with a hint of wild game essence. She managed a weak nod of thanks. Once her throat stopped burning, Eliza risked a proper greeting. "I'm Eliza Benton," she croaked, voice still shaky. He inclined his head. "I am River Eagle of the Cheyenne," he replied. Only then did she notice how carefully he spoke each English word, as though measuring it for accuracy. Curiosity stirred in her, but she held it back, focusing on the immediate matter of survival. "Thank you," she whispered, gesturing around the shelter. "You saved my life." River Eagle acknowledged this without triumph. "No one should freeze in the snow. The great winter shows no mercy. We must show it to each other." He returned his attention to his current task, carving a slender piece of wood, perhaps to repair a bow or create a tool handle. His calm presence reassured Eliza. Here, isolated from any settlement, it was just the two of them against the unforgiving elements. Yet he seemed perfectly at home, every movement purposeful. Over the next few days, Eliza's strength began to return under River Eagle's patient care. She learned that he had built this winter camp some years ago, a compact but durable dwelling made with poles of lodgepole pine and buffalo hides. A small fire pit at the center provided warmth, while the angled roof vented smoke. Supplies, salted meat, dried berries, furs, were carefully arranged around the shelter's perimeter, evidence of careful planning. During quiet moments, Eliza marveled at how thoroughly prepared River Eagle was for a season that had nearly killed her. She also discovered his pragmatic worldview. When she struggled to comprehend his presence in the territory, he explained in measured tones that he sometimes acted as a guide for military or traders, bridging knowledge of the land between his people and the newcomers. "Some learn, some do not," he said with a faint shrug. "But the land is here for all who respect it." In turn, Eliza revealed aspects of her past. She spoke haltingly of Walter's death, of Willow Bend turning cold when she was alone. Occasionally bitterness crept into her voice, but mostly she felt empty, as though the pain had burned itself out, leaving only a lingering sadness. River Eagle listened without overt judgment or cliched reassurances. "You were a teacher?" he asked at one point, eyeing her with renewed interest. "Yes," she replied, posture straightening a bit at the reminder of her life's vocation. "I taught the children math, reading, history, the basics. They were so eager to learn, at least some of them." She swallowed hard, recalling how quickly that eagerness vanished after Walter's funeral. But that ended with winter. River Eagle was silent for a time, as though mulling over her words. "Teaching is a skill," he finally said. "Our children learn from elders' stories. Perhaps your knowledge has new purpose." A flicker of hope sparked in Eliza's weary heart. Maybe her identity as a teacher could outlive the heartbreak of Willow Bend after all. Winter raged on outside, pounding the small shelter with wind and snow. Inside, Eliza and River Eagle found a rhythm in daily chores and quiet conversation. He showed her how to feed the fire with minimal wood, banking the coals to retain warmth longer. She helped organize supplies, carefully counting out preserved meat or measuring portions of dried berries. Even small tasks felt purposeful, granting Eliza a sense of control she had lost after Walter died. When she had the energy, Eliza pressed River Eagle about his facility with English. He told her of a missionary school he had briefly attended years ago, where he picked up reading and writing. Later, he served as a translator for Cheyenne elders during contentious treaty discussions. In turn, she shared stories of her childhood in the East, her passion for books, and the scholarship that brought her to a women's college. Their dialogues uncovered a shared love of knowledge. One morning, River Eagle ventured out to hunt, warning Eliza it might take him the better part of the day. The idea of being left alone in such a hostile environment unnerved her, but she understood they needed more fresh meat, especially if the relentless winter continued. Before he departed, he laid out a handful of tasks for her. Check the fire, sweep accumulating snow from around the shelter's base, and keep a watchful eye. He then demonstrated how to fasten a small knife at her hip, in case of unexpected wildlife. Eliza was struck by how differently he treated her than the men in Willow Bend had. He neither coddled nor dismissed her. He assumed competence once he taught her the necessary basics, trusting her to handle vital duties. That trust, however modest, stoked her resilience. She managed to feed the fire, adjust the hides around the entrance to prevent drafts, and even melt snow for extra drinking water. Hours slipped by. When River Eagle returned, dusk was darkening the sky, and he dragged behind him the carcass of a small deer. Grateful for the much-needed resource, Eliza assisted in the labor-intensive task of dressing and preserving the meat. Initially squeamish, she forced herself to learn each step he demonstrated, separating hide from flesh, setting aside sinew for sewing thread, and carving out fat to be rendered for tallow. It was bloody, gritty work, nothing like the genteel chores she had known growing up in a more refined setting. Yet in the flickering lamplight of the shelter, with wind still howling outside, it felt vital, a raw affirmation of survival. Afterward, they shared a simple meal of venison strips cooked over the open flame. Eliza savored every bite, the warmth of real protein coursing through her. Throughout dinner, she noticed River Eagle's occasional glances toward her, as if checking to see if this new life, her involvement in tasks once far beyond her experience, overwhelmed her. Each time she nodded in reassurance. Later that night, as the storm showed no sign of abating, they settled in for conversation. River Eagle, in a measured voice, spoke of how he had come to live on this edge between worlds. His father had once been a warrior, urging him to follow in those footsteps. But River Eagle had chosen a path of negotiation and cultural exchange, seeing that the changes coming from the east cannot be stopped but by arrows alone. Eliza told him about the time she tried to teach Willow Bend's children about the wider world, only to find parents suspicious of book learning they deemed impractical. Their stories, though very different, revealed common ground. Both had faced rejection for stepping beyond traditional expectations. By midwinter, Eliza's body regained strength, and with renewed health came a stirring desire for purpose. Teaching was more than just a job for her, it was a calling. She offered to help River Eagle improve his reading and writing. Intrigued by the proposal, he retrieved a small pouch from under a folded blanket. Inside, he kept a worn volume of the Leather Stocking Tales, given to him as partial payment for guiding a trader through dangerous territory. He already knew the broad plot from hearing it recounted, but deciphering the written words proved challenging. Gently, Eliza guided him through the letters, phonetics, and sentence structures. Patient as he was with her in matters of survival, she repaid the kindness in lessons about grammar and vocabulary. Each evening after their shared meal, they huddled near the fire. Holding the small book between them, she would read a passage aloud, then have him try to replicate the sounds, testing his understanding of each new word. Although he occasionally grew frustrated, English made him scoff at its irregularities. She admired his tenacity. In exchange, River Eagle taught her about Cheyenne lore, pointing out that stories functioned as both entertainment and repositories of cultural wisdom. He described how spiritual beliefs intertwined with respect for the land, the animals, and the ancestors who had tread the plains long before European settlers arrived. In hushed tones, he recounted how the arrival of more wagon trains each year threatened not just physical territories, but a whole way of life. Eliza listened avidly, her perspective broadening beyond anything she had ever gleaned from Eastern textbooks. Their unusual friendship deepened with each new lesson. Practical tasks filled the daylight hours, checking snares, gathering firewood, mending hide coverings of the shelter. But after sundown, conversation flowed in gentle currents, bridging the gap between their cultures. Neither romantic nor purely platonic, it assumed a space all its own, built on mutual respect, shaped by gratitude, and anchored by their shared isolation against winter's fury. Yet not even the sturdiest shelter can keep out all concerns. Eliza sometimes worried about what would become of her in spring. Would the people of Willow Bend accept her again if she returned? Did she even want to? And what of River Eagle's future? Caught between a traditional Cheyenne life and the unstoppable influx of settlers. A tension brewed in her chest as she contemplated how fleeting this sanctuary might be once the snows melted. At times, she spotted River Eagle watching her with an intensity that suggested unspoken questions of his own. Did he wonder about her ties to the world of cabins and storehouses, of strict laws and private ownership? Did he fear that once the path cleared, she would vanish back into civilization, leaving him with a memory but not a lasting bond? Neither of them spoke openly about such matters, perhaps because naming a fear can make it real. However, daily life demanded enough labor to keep deeper anxieties at bay. Eliza rose each morning to feed the embers, then maybe practice the Cheyenne words River Eagle had taught her. Greetings, simple nouns for trees, animals, and weather. By the time the sun set each day, she was too exhausted for extended brooding. Survival, it seemed, was its own form of therapy. As winter began its begrudging retreat, the nights grew marginally shorter, and the roar of blizzards receded into sporadic gusts. Eliza marked the changing season by the subtle drip of meltwater from the shelter's roof and the occasional break in the cloud cover that revealed a brilliantly starry sky. River Eagle predicted another month before true thaw, but the land was already whispering hints of transformation. Their stock of preserved venison and dried berries had dwindled, prompting more frequent hunting trips. On these outings, River Eagle sometimes took Eliza along, carefully teaching her how to strap on snowshoes and keep a watchful eye for hidden dangers. The first time she watched him make a successful bow shot at a skittish rabbit, she marveled at the smooth efficiency of his movements. Despite her initial nervousness, Eliza found a new satisfaction in being part of the process that sustained their life. She began to realize that civilization, as she once defined it, did not have a monopoly on knowledge, order, or even compassion. Spring's approach, however, also brought the reappearance of travelers on the main trails. Willow Bend was not the only settlement in Montana Territory, and Fort Pine to the west remained a hub for trading, prospectors, and Army patrols. Occasionally, River Eagle would return from a hunting trip reporting distant glimpses of riders or wagon tracks. He described them as potential prospectors or scouting parties, each crossing the territory in search of resources and opportunity. From time to time, the U.S. Army sent detachments to keep the peace, though whether they protected native inhabitants or the new settlers was a matter of perspective. The news unsettled Eliza. She recalled the condescending ways Willow Bend's town council had written off her teaching or labeled her burdensome once Walter was gone. She remembered how easily life and death decisions could be made by people ignorant of the real consequences. Fear gnawed at her. If an armed patrol stumbled upon this remote camp, how would they interpret her presence? Would they brand River Eagle an outlaw who had abducted a white woman? Her mind conjured frightening scenarios of violence and misunderstanding. River Eagle seemed to share these concerns. Though he rarely allowed alarm to show, Eliza noticed a subtle shift in his watchfulness. He set out extra traps near the perimeter of their camp, walked the area each morning to check for footprints, and kept his rifle within easy reach. When asked, he only said, "Men do desperate things at winter's end, whether from greed or hunger. We should be ready." One late afternoon, the threat became more than hypothetical. Eliza and River Eagle, returning from a short foraging trip, spied fresh tracks leading toward their shelter. Human footprints, not her own or River Eagle's. They approached with caution, concealing themselves in the tree line. Her heart hammered as she glimpsed 3 riders near the water's edge, scanning the landscape. It reminded her of the men in Willow Bend who had looked at her not as a human being with hopes and fears, but as a resource or a liability. River Eagle gripped her arm in silent warning, and they circled wide to avoid direct confrontation. That night, they slept in shifts. The strangers passed without incident, but tension remained in the air. Increasingly, they understood that once the thaw truly arrived, isolation would end. Larger forces, settlers, the army, the quest for land, would intrude. In hushed moments by the fire, Eliza asked, "What happens if they force you off this land?" River Eagle replied that his people had already seen it happen in other territories. "We move or we fight," he said gravely. But fighting changes little if the tide is large enough. As if in answer to their growing anxiety, nature mounted its own spectacle of power. One morning, Eliza woke to the sound of relentless dripping. Overnight temperatures had risen sharply, transforming the once solid snowpack into a half-melted quagmire. The creek near their shelter, which had been frozen for months, now rushed with startling velocity, carrying away ice chunks and flooding low areas. River Eagle called it the break of winter, a dangerous time when the land could shift overnight from stable ground to swampy pits. This unexpected thaw accelerated their need to make decisions. Eliza and River Eagle had long discussed the possibility of traveling to Fort Pine once the weather improved. There she might find a place to teach again, perhaps at a small mission or a trading post where children of different backgrounds could learn side by side. He, meanwhile, could reconnect with certain traders or army officers who respected him as a reliable guide. But the idea of stepping back into a civilized settlement filled Eliza with dread. She had come to value the honesty and clarity of their winter existence. Still, that life was untenable in the face of increasing traffic and potential misunderstandings. With urgency in the air, they began to pack essential items for possible departure. They dismantled parts of the shelter that could be reused, wooden poles, hides, and cached them for retrieval. River Eagle showed Eliza how to wrap their minimal library, the novel he'd been deciphering and a small journal she'd used for notes, in oil-treated hides to protect against water damage. If they had to leave quickly, they could sling their bundle over a horse or on a travois and travel light. 2 days of frantic preparation passed uneventfully. Then, at dawn on the third day, a threat arrived in the form of 4 uniformed soldiers picking their way through the soaked terrain. Eliza and River Eagle spotted them first from a slight rise near the shelter. "Army," River Eagle said grimly, noticing the distinct shape of their hats and the polished but mud-splattered boots. Instinct said to hide, but they realized the footprints in the partially dismantled camp would be discovered anyway. Flight risked convincing the soldiers that Eliza was a captive. They decided on a controlled approach. As the soldiers poked around the edges of the camp, Eliza walked forward in plain sight, River Eagle trailing several paces behind with open hands, no weapons drawn. The leader, a lieutenant named Foster, eyed them cautiously. One soldier's hand hovered near his rifle. "Ma'am, we received word of a missing white woman. We were told she might be in the custody of a Cheyenne man," Foster said, glancing at River Eagle. "Is that you?" The phrase "in custody" bristled Eliza. Standing as straight as her exhausted body allowed, she explained her story. The harsh winter, her near death, River Eagle's intervention. Her voice grew clear as she recounted the rescue and their mutual exchange of knowledge. The soldiers listened in varying degrees of skepticism, but Foster, though guarded, seemed somewhat open-minded. "We have orders to escort you to Fort Pine, ma'am," he finally said. "We need to ensure your safety. That's all." Eliza sensed that safety translated to reasserting the Army's authority. Still, they had little choice if they wished to avoid confrontation or violence. River Eagle remained composed, but she caught the tension in his shoulders. Agreeing to accompany the soldiers would mean stepping into the public eye, where gossip and prejudice would flourish. Refusing, however, risked immediate conflict. Carefully, she said, "We already planned to travel to Fort Pine ourselves. We can go together." Foster nodded, seemingly relieved to avoid hostilities. That afternoon, under the watchful eyes of Lieutenant Foster's men, Eliza and River Eagle packed the last of their belongings. The soldiers, for their part, offered minimal help but did not interfere once they realized Eliza had no intention of accusing River Eagle of wrongdoing. They seemed puzzled by the respectful rapport between them. One private mumbled something about unusual arrangements, while another surveyed the carefully prepared supplies with grudging admiration for River Eagle's skill. Soon they set out, the soldiers leading their own horses, while Eliza and River Eagle managed a single mount carrying the travois. The trail proved slippery and partially submerged in places, forcing them to take detours around flooded streams. The pace was grueling, especially with the midday sun heating the ground enough to release more meltwater. Despite her months of improved stamina, Eliza found herself weary from both physical exertion and the emotional strain of traveling with men who clearly mistrusted the Cheyenne presence. Conversation was sparse. Foster occasionally asked Eliza polite questions, where she was from back east, what drew her to teach in the territory, but maintained a professional distance. River Eagle answered direct inquiries curtly, focusing on the path and the conditions. Now and then he took Eliza aside to point out safe footing or warn her of hidden bogs, reminding her of the winter lessons that had once been a matter of life or death. Late in the afternoon, they crested a hill that granted a panoramic view of Fort Pine, nestled by a wide bend in the river. In stark contrast to Willow Bend, Fort Pine was larger and more established. A cluster of wooden buildings sprawled around the fortress-like structure that served as the Army headquarters. Riverboats occasionally docked here to offload goods, and travelers from all directions made it a crossroads of commerce and negotiation. The presence of so many people both intrigued and intimidated Eliza. She had grown used to the quiet rhythms of the winter shelter. They made camp just outside the fort's perimeter fence, the soldiers insisting on an official check-in before Eliza could stay in any lodging house. That evening, Foster politely but firmly informed them that the commanding officer, Colonel Harrington, would want a full account first thing in the morning. "You'll likely be given quarters at a boarding home, Mrs. Benton," Foster remarked, even as Eliza noticed his eyes flick toward River Eagle in mild disapproval. "We'll see that Mr. Eagle." "Eliza and I will decide what is best," River Eagle interjected softly, the first time he had spoken in a tone nearing defiance. Foster cleared his throat, uncertain how to respond. Eliza quickly intervened. "I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant, but please understand, River Eagle is not my captor. We are traveling companions by choice." Foster merely nodded, evidently unwilling to argue the point in open camp. They bedded down for the night, with the soldiers occupying the standard Army tents, and Eliza and River Eagle sharing a smaller canvas shelter provided for special circumstances. Any illusions that they could maintain the privacy of their winter arrangement vanished. Here, eyes and ears surrounded them. More than once, Eliza heard the hushed commentary of passing soldiers, speculating on what possible relationship a white woman could have with a Cheyenne man. The words stung, but a spark of resolve kindled in her. She would not let ignorance discredit the truth. Morning arrived beneath a pale skyline, the sun climbing over the stockade walls of Fort Pine. Lieutenant Foster escorted Eliza and River Eagle to meet Colonel Harrington, a stout man with clipped gray hair who radiated an air of authority. His office, furnished with a functional desk and a few maps pinned to the wooden walls, smelled faintly of pipe tobacco. Sitting back in a worn leather chair, Harrington bade them speak. Eliza stepped forward to recount her story once more, neither defensive nor apologetic. She emphasized her prior life as a teacher, her husband's death, the desperation that led her into the storm, and finally River Eagle's timely rescue. If Harrington was taken aback by her forthright tone, he gave no sign beyond a slight twitch of his brow. He turned to River Eagle, questioning him about his movements in the territory, whether he had any official tribal affiliation, or if he served as a guide. River Eagle answered with the same measured clarity he had displayed all winter. Yes, he guided Army patrols and traders, but he was not beholden to any single faction. Harrington listened, steepling his fingers and occasionally scribbling notes. When Eliza concluded, Harrington leaned forward. "I have read Mr. Carter's report," he said, referencing the earlier traveler who had claimed Eliza might be a captive. "He painted a more troubling picture, but from what I see now, that might have been an overreach on his part." He regarded them with a searching gaze. "Mrs. Benton, do you wish to remain at Fort Pine under the protection of the Army? We can arrange for you to return east, or wherever you wish to go." Her response came without hesitation. "I appreciate your concern, Colonel, but I plan to remain in Montana Territory. I am a teacher. Many families here, both settlers and Cheyenne, need education. If there is a way to provide schooling that bridges our communities, I want to do that." She glanced at River Eagle, her meaning clear. "We have each learned from the other. Perhaps there is a place here for someone who can teach and someone who can guide." The idea of a Cheyenne man and a white woman working together for educational purposes drew a frown from Harrington. "This territory is volatile," he reminded them. "We've had increased tension, especially with rumors of gold leading people into land the Cheyenne consider sacred. It's not a time for novelty." Eliza felt her hands clench. "Knowledge is not a novelty, Colonel," she replied firmly. "It's a necessity if we're to coexist without violence." Silence stretched in the room. Finally, Harrington exhaled. "All right, Mrs. Benton. You can stay at the mission run by the Grayson family. They're good people, known to the Army. River Eagle," he turned to the Cheyenne man, "we do not bar you from the fort, but understand tensions run high. Tread carefully. I can't guarantee how others might react to your presence. River Eagle inclined his head, neither expressing gratitude nor anger. It was a measured acceptance, much like the environment he had cultivated all winter. And so by midday, Eliza found herself at a humble but well-kept mission house on the outskirts of Fort Pine. Run by Reverend Samuel Grayson and his wife Margaret, it served as both a church school for settler children and a place that occasionally offered hospitality to civilized natives seeking education or spiritual instruction. It was not an official mixing ground for Cheyenne and white families, but it was closer than any place Eliza had known in Willow Bend. Margaret Grayson took one look at Eliza's travel-worn appearance, then her resolute eyes, and led her inside with a welcoming smile. That evening, River Eagle came to see her there. He arrived quietly, though the watchful gaze of the mission children followed him. In the privacy of a small reading room, they reunited to discuss how to navigate the weeks ahead. "We stand at a fork," River Eagle observed in a soft voice. "The place between worlds is narrow." Eliza reached for his hand, an action she would never have dared in public view, but felt safe enough to do in the confines of the mission. "I choose the path that honors what we learned in winter," she said. "Whatever it takes, we'll walk it." From a personal perspective, watching our protagonist and her unexpected ally stand together despite daunting odds is a testament to how empathy and respect can bridge worlds. Their journey took them from mistrust to mutual hope, building a life rooted in cooperation rather than fear. Through harsh winters, skeptical neighbors, and uncertain futures, they proved that unity can flourish in even the most challenging conditions. It's a reminder that we all have the power to rewrite our own stories when we stand firm in our convictions and open our hearts to others. If this resonates with you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts and experiences. Let's keep the conversation alive, and don't forget to follow for more uplifting tales in the future.